Hi there, everyone. My name is Max, and I'd like to thank you all on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore for tuning into tonight's event with us. Tonight, we're lucky to have with us Jill and Dave Henry, who will be talking with a couple of guests of theirs about their new book, The Greatest College Health Guide You Never Knew You Needed. Jill and Dave have been coaching, entertaining, and educating teens in Los Angeles for more than 20 years combined. With every graduating class, they've fielded their student athletes' concerns about the transition to college, particularly the dreaded freshman 15. Yeah, I'll admit I was also a little scared of that at first. Determined to help, the Henrys decided to leverage their professional backgrounds and create a resource to help young adults enjoy college without sacrificing their health. If you would like to ask them a question at any point in the event, you can go ahead and click the Ask a Question button towards the bottom and type your question, and they'll go ahead and get to that towards the end of the event. And lastly, if you would like to purchase their college health guide, you can go ahead and click the green button down below, and it'll take you to our website. But with that all out of the way, I'll go ahead and let them take over. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Max. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We want to thank Vromans for giving us this platform to speak on. We want to thank everybody for sharing the time. We understand how busy everybody is these days, and it's something that we're really excited about in order to share this. This project has been an incredible journey for us. It's been a long time in the making. And so tonight we're going to talk about why we wrote this book, what students and parents can expect to find inside the book, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. But in order to broaden the conversation, we have two very special guests that we wanted to invite to this conversation. Crystal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Crystal Sear. I am a student affairs professional in higher education. So I've worked in higher ed for over a decade with first-year students and academic support. And now I'm currently at the University of Colorado Boulder working in student affairs and in assessment. I'm the assessment specialist there.
Awesome. And Erica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Winter. I'm here to speak a little bit on the student side of this. I graduated from high school in Los Angeles in 2016, did my first 2 years of undergrad at Syracuse University, and then transferred halfway through in 2018 to George Washington University in DC, where I graduated in 2020. And I'm now working as a publicist in DC and also doing my master's at Georgetown.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys, for being here and sharing this conversation with us about the book. The book actually started nearly 5 years ago at this point, which is pretty surreal that it's taken this long to get here. It was originally promised to be a graduation gift for the kids who graduated high school in 2017. So we're a little behind on that. They just graduated college.
But we delivered.
Better late than never. Dave and I actually met coaching high school sports. And so a lot of the work that we dig into in this book is built on the foundation that we both have in health education. But this really started with one particular encounter that I had at the last race of a cross-country season with one of my senior runners who wasn't going to be doing sports beyond high school cross-country. And so the reality of having to take care of herself on her own was already starting to hit her a bit like a brick wall, even in the fall. And she didn't know where she would be going to college yet. But she realized that all of the good habits that she had ingrained in her life were really as a result of being in a high school sport, and knew that because that wasn't going to continue, that burden was on her. And so we promised that we could help. And her big fear initially was the freshman 15, as we talk about in the About the Author, and we bring up in the book, because that's what a lot of students hear about. And so that's an initial concern for many. But we dug into much bigger issues than the freshman 15 in this book. We cover main areas of health being nutrition, alcohol, exercise, stress, sleep. We talk about habits. We talk about relationships. We talk about finances. Those were all areas that there's no shortage of information on. And so when we started originally doing some research to compile a resource for that student and the other seniors in that class, we found plenty of things. The issue was that none of them were particularly interesting. I'll just be candid there. As people who really like reading about health, we found that a lot of the times they just weren't engaging or rooted in personal experience. And a lot of the things that we found that were directed at students were on college wellness websites, and very deep and very detailed. But colleges have somewhat of a responsibility to package things in a clean and clinical way. And the nice thing about us not being affiliated with a college is we have the freedom to explore these topics with a bit more rooting in our personal stories, to liberally somewhat use some profanity just to keep things interesting and lively. And so we wanted to give it, take a pass at bringing all of this information together in one resource in a way that would hopefully be engaging and connect with students.
And as Jill said, we rooted our entry point into these conversations with health in our own personal stories. We both struggled mightily in college with different things, but that idea of struggling with something is so universal that it was really important to us not to limit this conversation to only our experiences. And so we wanted to include as many voices as possible. And we started a Snowball Survey where we worked with a psychologist in order to design questions to elicit really raw, personal, vulnerable human responses. And we got over hundreds of students across the country to it's incredible the stories that they offered. It's powerful. And that was something that in order to curate the best advice from as many voices as possible, we needed to reach out to as many of these people, because that transition going from high school where your whole life is structured for you to college where you're completely open and free and you get to decide what it is that you're going to do and when you're going to do it is really, really challenging. And one of the first studies that we cite in the book actually states that the reason that so many students struggle with these things is really just a lack of resources and understanding what to do about it. That it's important for anyone, because the change in the schedule going from my whole life is dictated for me, what I'm going to eat, when I'm going to go to sleep, if I'm going to stay out late or not, all of those things are completely up to them now. And so as a human being who struggles with health, as all human beings do, we realize that this point in time, this juncture, where it's now completely on the shoulders of an individual for the first time, is exactly the moment where they need a really comprehensive resource that can help with any one of these manner.
One thing we found really interesting in the research was there's a tool called the Holmes Stress Assessment, and it's essentially a cataloging of life's most traumatic events. And there's 42 events on the list, and 3 of them are things that students would encounter when they go off to college. One of them being a change in school, the other being a change in residence, and the last being taking out a loan. And so if you encounter any of those issues, it's supposed to indicate if an upcoming dip in mental health. And to think that students are experiencing all 3 of these things is just to say that this is circumstantial. The struggle is inevitable because of the position that these students are in. So for those students who are in here tonight listening, understand that the situational change for you is really what's going to motivate it being hard. It's not anything that you've done, and Erica will talk a lot about her experience. But we can also attest from the student quotes that we read, from the studies that we reviewed, that this challenge is universal, and you're set up just because of the way things are structured for it to be a difficult transition. So Crystal, can you comment a little bit about your work and how health and wellness plays a role in that student transition to college life?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was trying to get my mic off. Health and wellness plays a major role in the college transition and the student experience. There's tons of studies that are out there that talks about this relationship. I'm not going to spend time just kind of citing data for you, but I'll summarize a little bit. So essentially what we're looking at is when students are transitioning to college, as you all have already said, like they are experiencing really high stresses, right? They have these major stressors in their life. And we know from student development theory in higher ed, we know from transition theory that events, when students are experiencing events, that it's going to impact their role, it's going to impact the relationships that they have with others, it's going to impact their routines, it's going to impact the assumptions that they make about the world, and it's all about their perceptions of how they're going to work through that. And so transition theory tells us, like, there's these 4 S's. There's this situation. Am I in control of the situation? Kind of, a little bit, but not really. You kind of lend yourself to the environment and to the college experience and to the professionals on campus to help you navigate that. And are you familiar with this new situation that you're coming into? We see often that students consider college to be grade 13. And that's just not the truth. It is not the same experience. You're not going to learn in the same way. Your routines and your habits that you did to be successful in high school are not going to carry over to college in the way that you expect them to, that you would expect them to. So what does that situation look like? How do you perceive that? What's your perception of yourself and your identity? Where are you at in your identity development? How confident are you in your ability to successfully navigate this really stressful time? What about your supports? When they're transitioning, when students are transitioning to a college environment, in the whole K-12 system, our supports were our family primarily. When you're transitioning to college, especially if you're moving on to a residential campus, you might be away from home for a while, your supports now shift from family to peers who are really strangers that we don't actually know, but that we're going to turn to for help, and there are new confidants. And so that can be a little scary and a little challenging as well. And then what are those strategies? What strategies do you have? What are your behaviors, actions, habits that you've created that you feel like can support you during this transition? And it's that entire perception that helps students to understand how successfully they can navigate through that. I think one of the things that I really love about the book is that it brings all of that into context for students, right? So students and families, when they're reading it, can actually think about this in all of it, right? The self, the situation, the strategies, they're all addressed in the book in a way that gets people to reflect on what's been my experience and what can I kind of actually expect going into this, and not what the media is telling me I should expect, or the beautiful photos on social media is telling me what I should expect. So it's one of the things that I love about the book is it's really helping them to bring that perception into reality.
Right. Maybe jumping off that, Erica, can you talk about what you remember from your transition from high school to college?
Yeah, so I moved, as I said, across the country for college. And I think the biggest thing that you notice in that transition is like I have every hour of every day to myself to figure out what to do with. High school, you're in such a structured system. You go to class, you're told which class is at what time. I mean, it's all planned out for you. Whatever sport you're in, it's all laid out. So then when you get there and you have maybe 1-2 classes a day and then a whole bunch of hours in between, you get to pick what time they're at. You're structuring. If you wanted to eat a bowl of M&Ms for dinner, like you can do that. You know, you have every option. You can do whatever you want. You are on your own. And I think that independence is so exciting. And that's a part of some of the best parts of college. But at the same time, that's one of the hardest aspects of that transition is figuring out, okay, I stayed up till 4 a.m. and then I feel awful the next day because no one made me go to bed. Or, you know, you have a little bit of trial and error there of figuring out what you can do in the day and seeing what works ultimately.
What's so interesting about that is earlier this spring, we did a talk with seniors in high school, and we started the presentation by asking a question: when was the last time you felt terrible, physically, mentally, emotionally? And like 90% of the groups were like, oh, within the last 2 weeks. And I think part of it is COVID. Certainly, we've all had a strange last year and a half. But I think it opened the conversation up to what is really a theme of the book, which is feeling terrible is somewhat inevitable, particularly when you are faced with now all of these decisions that are on you for the first time. And so one of the through lines of the book is really recognizing that when it happens and then developing the skills to do a self-assessment so that, like you said, Erica, you can be like, well, maybe I feel like garbage today because I ate a bowl of M&Ms for dinner, or I didn't sleep because I was staying up until 4 a.m. to do a paper. And so we talk about that very candidly with a real attempt to not be judgmental because it's a reality. It was funny for us writing this book. The irony of writing a college health book is that we had to sacrifice our health to get it done in some cases. And so you're really constantly checking in with yourself as you're writing and trying to figure out, why do I feel the way that I feel and what can I do about it? And developing those skills takes practice. And like Erica said, a real trial and error, so to speak. The failure is an inevitable piece of that.
Yeah, and that's what's so important is that it's not so much about prevention, right? It's not that you will read this book and forever be changed. and completely have armor that will stop anything that will ever make you feel bad, right? It's that this stuff is going to get to you at some point, because life is going to get to you at some point. The National College Health Assessment asked this question of when was the last time you felt completely overwhelmed within the last year? And 88% of college students said that they felt completely overwhelmed within the last year. 60% of those people said that, oh, I felt that way within the last 2 weeks, right? So it's not so much about, I'm going to learn things that will make me forever be a healthy human being. It's you're going to be down. And at some point when you're down, you're going to want to have an avenue to move that's going to make you feel better. And that's why it's so important to have it all in one place, right? Because if you don't have it in one place, you're not going to be like Googling, well, what do I do to make myself feel better at 4 o'clock in the morning when you've got a paper due at 7 o'clock, right? Yeah. We as a society, we fall into this narrative that college is going to be the best 4 years of our life. Right.
And what's interesting about that is we had a lot of students in the survey weigh in and point that out. And their takeaway was that puts a lot of pressure on us, because when we're not having the best year of our life or the best time when we get to college, we feel like we've done something wrong. Erica, can you talk about your expectations of what college was going to be like and maybe how that differed from reality once you got there and started experiencing it?
Yeah. I think the best 4 years of your life is the image that you go in with. People are like, these are the friends you're going to have forever. These are the best memories you're never going to want to leave. And there's a very clear image, I think, in our society of what that looks like. And so I went and thought, I'm going to be in a sorority and I'm going to find these friends and have the best time and be so happy. And I got there, I did the whole pledging thing and all of that. I went to the parties, I tried to do it all, and I was like not loving it. And I wasn't meeting the friends that I was like, these are my best friends forever. And I felt like a failure because, and I'm hyper competitive, so I hate feeling that way, but it was awful. I mean, everyone is saying like, oh, can you not wait to go back to school? And I was like, I was crying, having to get on the plane to go back to campus. And everyone around you at school, I remember people were like, oh, I don't want to go home for winter break because I love it here. I bleed orange, all of that. And I was so jealous of that feeling because I was like, I can't wait to go home. Yeah. So it's overwhelming, and you hate to feel that way, but I think recognizing that there actually are a lot more people out there that don't have that feeling and do feel similarly to you, because the few people that I talked to, and I actually found some friends who were like, hey, I'm considering transferring too. And I was like, no way. So am I. And just getting through that and accepting the fact that like, okay, it's okay for this not to be the reality, really made a difference, but it sucked. It still sucked. Yeah.
And then when you found yourself in that position where you were at school and you weren't enjoying where you were, and you felt badly because everybody's telling you this is supposed to be the best experience of my life, how did you go about deciding to transfer? And then how did you end up choosing the school that you wanted to go to? What was the kind of criteria that you used?
Yeah. So I went in picking Syracuse and looking at my original schools because I thought I want this traditional college experience with a quad in a small town and big sports. And when I started realizing that wasn't doing the trick for me, I knew I wanted to intern and be more involved in the community and working. So I started looking for schools that were really city centric. So I was looking at schools like NYU, GW, or in major cities, where I knew that maybe if the school culture didn't work out for me, I could just immerse myself in a city and find other avenues to make myself happy. It was weird because so many other people didn't understand that. And they were like, no, this is college. This is it. And so it was a hard decision to come to. And I really thought like, maybe I just stick it out. There's only 2 more years. I made it through 2. Why don't I go through 2 more? But it also had to have a lot of self-reflection and realize like, I cannot do 2 more years like this. For my mental state. I can't. Yeah.
Crystal, do you have any insight from your work or from data about how student expectations might differ from reality and what students are basing their expectations on?
Yeah, student expectations are so different from the reality of the college experience for the majority of students that actually participate in college. What I think what we hear from students, wanting the normal college experience, really similar to what Erica was saying, like, I'm checking the boxes, I'm doing the things, I'm joining the sorority, I'm joining the organization, I'm going to the party, I'm pulling the all-nighters, like I'm doing this stereotypical college thing because that's what the media is showing me. That's what film, TV, social media, like this is what I'm seeing that the college experience is like. And those are like little chunks of time in a 168-hour week and 4 years. So it's not capturing the day-to-day, right? It's capturing like the milestone moments, right? That are the fun, entertaining pieces to look at. So yeah, the expectation versus reality is far off for students. And we see that in data. We see that in our institutional surveys that we do just kind of internally in-house. But the National College Health Assessment up until 2019 would ask students, particularly around alcohol and drug use, how they perceived the use of other students on their campus to be using different substances. And then they also ask the students participating in the survey, how frequently do you use these substances? And when you compare those numbers, they are so drastically off. So alcohol and drug use, students perceive others to be using at significantly higher rates than those that are actually reporting on the survey. And that's a trend that we've seen over time to the point where they've stopped asking that question because there's no point anymore. We know that students perceive this to be a higher rate. And so when the subject of peer influence comes up and using alcohol and other drugs, harm reduction is really important. You'll see that on campuses talking about the reality of it. And strategies, if you do choose to use, how to use safely, which I think comes up in the book a lot, which is really helpful. So students have that information walking in and not getting into the environment and saying, is there a resource here that can help me? Is there someone that I can talk to about this? We also see academically, again, what I mentioned earlier, students expect college to be like grade 13, where they're going to learn in the same way. They're going to spend the same amount of time outside of the classroom as they did in high school. And it's a flipped kind of classroom model in college. So academically, what worked then isn't necessarily going to work now. And my background in academic support, when first exam time rolled around, like 3 weeks into the semester, everyone was flooding the tutoring center and wanting to get help with test taking strategies. Well, let's ignore the test taking and talk about the study strategies and the homework and going to class. And those pieces, that's what's actually going to help you do well on the test. So yeah, there's a lot of differences in the perception versus reality. And that's why the more real information I think students can get ahead of time, the better prepared that they're going to be to go through that transition and more accurately assess and perceive what they're going to be walking into.
Yeah, we saw such a wonderful response in the surveys that was really consistent from numerous people, was this idea that when I was going to college, I was so scared that somebody was going to try and pressure me into doing something I didn't want to do. And they found that the first time they spoke up, and they said, oh, no, thanks, I don't want to drink. Or actually, I'm going to go home and study tonight. That people were so welcoming to their position that it was like, oh my God, like it was completely this empowering kind of moment. And that's one of the things that we really wanted to include, was this perspective of, we all struggle with something, but if you're going to be in a position where I'm telling you as a coach that you shouldn't drink until you're 21, and your parents are telling you you shouldn't drink until you're 21, that message of you can say no is so much more powerful when it's coming from a peer, right? When it's somebody who's in your peer group who's saying, I did this, and the reception that I received was amazing. We see binge drinking numbers across campuses are, around 40%, and they've stayed around that rate for the last few decades. But the number of college students who don't drink at all is like 27%, right? So there's this big population that doesn't do that at all. And the idea of finding your people when you're in college is something that will take some effort. One of the things that we've talked about too is this idea that whoever you're surrounded with, whether it's your roommate or the people who you meet that first week of school, are going to be your best friends. Well, if that doesn't work out that way, right? Well, then what are you going to do about it? And this idea that you've got to put a little bit of effort into finding the people who you can connect with.
We really, to get on Erica's point, and Crystal said this too, there's so much time in your day, and the expectations you have about college is like the highlight reel. But our book really focused on the minutia, the miniature choices you have to make every day to take some ownership over how you feel. And so we focused on every area of health because there's a lot of balls to keep in the air when you're taking care of yourself. When I got to college, I was a complete animal with food, like had no concept of how to navigate a dining hall. I was eating cereal with chocolate milk in it because I was like, there's a spigot with endless chocolate milk and I should put this in my cereal because no one is stopping me from doing it. And just because it was a dining hall buffet style, I'm like, oh, I'm going to have a few bites of pizza. I don't need to finish that because I need to leave room for a hamburger, and just went off the rails. And I ate healthy growing up, but I had no education in what healthy food was and how to eat for nutrition. Most kids don't. This is a part of the high school education that just doesn't exist. We don't talk about how to live as a human being in this world and take care of yourself. And it's something everybody has to do. You have to make so many choices that impact how you feel, that we're missing this education to get everybody to have a common baseline. And so food was something that I really struggled with because I didn't know any better. Despite my parents setting me up for success, it didn't matter. When I had the freedom, I just lost control. And the other thing was exercise. And I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. I was not a good athlete, but I did sports year round. And I had coaches that told me that I needed to be running suicides and teammates that would get on me if I didn't show up. And so getting exercise was taken care of for me. And when sports ended, I was like, awesome. I don't have to go to practice anymore. I can just play intramurals and play the games, which is the best part. What I didn't realize was that sports were the only thing that was giving me any sort of physical, exercise, anything that was building strength. And so while I initially celebrated the lack of restriction to sports, it ended up leaving this void that I had no concept of how to fill. And so those were the two places that I really struggled, that I talk about in the book. And Dave, what's funny is that our struggles were completely complementary because I didn't find myself down the same holes that he was.
Yeah, I struggled with alcohol use a lot my freshman year. And the people who I was surrounded with, all my peer groups, were all struggling the same way. And so to your point, Crystal, about answering this question, well, what is drinking culture like in college? And what is my experience like? We were a smaller percentage of the whole vast kind of student experience, right? And those issues forced me to transfer colleges, frankly. And it took me years to try and get my habits in order to be able to take care of myself in a functional way. And that's something that having that opinion, having that perspective represented in the book, there will be people who you meet who may fall into this category. But again, they're not going to be the only people on campus. And so finding that ability to search out whoever it is that are your people, again, I got to say that again, that's so important that it will take effort on your part. You're going to go through a first couple weeks of school where there's lots of events and there's lots of chances to meet people, and then it's all going to disappear. And a month and a half into it, you're going to be like, okay, well, how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to do this? And those are the times where it's going to take some effort to join an intramural club or to try and reach out to that person and say, hey, I've seen you in my class. This is hard. Do you want to meet at the library? And do you want to get together at 6 and we'll try and go through this stuff? Those kind of things will take effort. It's not going to come to you.
We really try to lay this foundation in the book of health and trying to provide some baseline information to get kids on the right track. But I still think that there's a lot of truth in the idea that it doesn't matter. It's good to be prepared, but it's still probably inevitable that you're going to stumble when you get there. So Crystal, can you talk about what sorts of resources exist on campus for students? Hopefully this gives them an awareness that the struggle is normal and there are ways to turn it around, but what sort of things exist on a campus that students can look to when midway through fall semester, they realize like they've only been sleeping 4 hours a night and they feel miserable.
Yeah. Well, the good news is there's tons of resources on campuses. Of course, it's going to vary depending on which college you're attending. But what we've seen a trend in really in the last decade in higher ed is more of this focus on holistic health and wellness. So Jill and Dave have hit on this a lot already. Health and wellness is not just about the food you put in your body and how you're moving every day. There is so much more to it than that. At CU Boulder, where I'm currently working, we have a whole page on our website that talks about Hetler's dimensions of wellness. There's 7, possibly 8 now. I think they might have added an 8th one. But it really talks about the whole person, and it's about when you're looking at it for a college student in particular, yes, it's about your nutrition. Yes, it's about your physical health, but it's also about your mental health. It's about your social health, getting connected on campus. We see time and time again that sense of belonging and that connection. That's what helps people feel like they stay when they find their people and they have that connection to others, to a group. It helps with their mental health. It just helps as a great coping mechanism when they are experiencing those chronic stresses. It looks at financial health. It's a little bit of everything. And a lot of schools are starting to follow this model where the resources that they're providing for students, and they're really investing a lot of resources into, are designed to support this holistic health and wellness. So you are going to see things on campuses like everything from recreation centers that have much more personalized programs now. So you can find like personal trainers. Some have like physical therapy, different types of those personalized options, dining services that actually have some nourishing food that are also a little bit more culturally inclusive now, being mindful of food restrictions among different cultural groups. Medical services and kind of the umbrella that falls into. There's usually a lot of specialized clinics within medical services to support different needs there. I talked about alcohol and other drug use programs, but they do a lot of education, a lot of harm reduction, some intervention strategies. There's been a big investment in mental health support across the country. We know that is something coming up. Mental health and physical health are 2 areas that we know incoming students, especially this upcoming year coming out of COVID, really need the additional support in. Physical health, partly because they have gotten out of their habits. They're not participating in sports and they're not going to the gym and they're sitting down for a virtual environment. So they're not as mobile. They have much more of a sedentary lifestyle this last year. So we know getting them back into those physical habits is going to take some time. So there's been a huge investment in those resources coming up. There's victim advocacy services. There's support programs for like basic needs security, like food pantries, disability accessibility services, academic support. Again, those help with the strategies like stress management and time management. It's not just how to do the math problem or how to write the paper, but what are the strategies that can help kind of reduce that stress so you can perform better academically in addition to actually learning the content too. So there's and that's just like breaking the surface.
Sure.
Lot of these fall in student affairs, which is kind of, that's my profession. It's that outside of the classroom co-curricular environment. And so what's really nice is within student affairs on any college campus, those professionals are trained on, here are all the resources that exist on campus. When you're talking to a student and you feel like they need support, here's where you need to refer for them. Here's how you can connect them to those resources. And if students are living on campus, the best person to talk to is their RA. The best person, because they're trained on all the resources. They're a peer. They're probably pretty close to your age. And so they've been there too. So they can also offer that insight. But if you don't know where to start, because like my division has almost 40 departments in it, that can be a lot. And you're learning about them all in orientation. And we expect you to remember that like mid-fall, right? So when you're getting to that point, you're like, okay, I think I could use some support in this. just ask someone. Just reach out and ask anyone. And RA is a great starting point, but you can even ask your professors, and they can help connect you to the right resources because there's a ton out there.
Well, and to piggyback on that idea of just how intertwined all these things are, right? You're talking about all these different components of health. They all feed into each other. And when your mental health suffers, everything starts to suffer, right? If your body has high levels of cortisol because you're stressed out, that affects your appetite, that affects your ability to sleep, that affects your drive and your motivation. And all of those things can be helped by sleeping and exercising and eating well. And so it's not that it's a bland vanilla if you just do these things and take care of yourself. It's that as it starts to chip away at you from a stress standpoint, proactively doing these things will help you feel better. And Erica, I was curious, over your experience in college, what did you learn about how to take care of yourself? What kind of positive routines did you put in place that you didn't have, let's say, when you first showed up on campus?
Yeah, and to add a little bit onto that last point, I think noticing when I didn't feel like myself, and I knew that some of that mild depression and that I was so unhappy was affecting other aspects of my life, that I'm usually a super outgoing person, and that depression changed that. I wasn't that way anymore. So finding the different outlets that made me happy really made a huge difference. So going more into that and finding those routines, it's all about trial and error. And I think you guys do an awesome job in this book outlining that there's not one formula for every person, and that's okay. And you have to figure it out for yourself, through some super late nights, staying up until 4 a.m., writing a pretty shitty paper that I read the next day and was like, I can't turn this in. And learning about myself, like I didn't. And I was like, well, there was 6 hours of my life. And realizing that, actually, okay, I work better by maybe just going to bed and then getting up at 6 and writing for 2 hours. And those 2 hours were way more efficient than the 6 I spent last night. So I learned that about myself. I learned that working out made the biggest difference for me. I really got into going to the gym at school and just how big of a difference it made in my energy levels. It made me sleep better. I was more interested in doing things and going places just because I had that energy and I had that outlet, which also really helped in terms of managing stress. I also learned that there were things I didn't like in the dining hall and I would just need to adapt myself. So I got a NutriBullet. I figured out what I like to eat, what I liked to make in my dorm room, rice cakes with avocado on it. Like that became a staple in my everyday life. Things like that, where you just adapt and figure out how your routine works. So mine was getting up early to grind out some homework, go to the gym, go to class, and then be able to do a little bit more studying later, see your friends, make your meals, and figuring that all out for myself. But I also had a roommate who was like, no, I can start doing my homework at 11 p.m. And she was completely fine with that lifestyle.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the things that students need to learn is just how to manage their time. I think we talked about it when we all spoke last night, but that the thing that is looked forward to the most is the freedom. And that from the student responses we read, that's also the thing that sort of comes back to haunt you, is you have to make so many decisions every day that affect how you feel. And that was one thing that I really want to mention to everybody who's listening, is that we call this a health book. We don't talk about, we use the word weight maybe once. It's not about the freshman 15. It might have been how it started, but the whole book is rooting the identity of health and how you feel and not how you look.
100%.
And I think what's so tough for everybody nowadays is social media really celebrates the physical manifestation of health. We have fitness influencers who are showing us what they eat and how they work out. And that extends down into college. There are groups and organizations that are for college girls who want to be fit and want to post their workouts. And that can be a lot of pressure. And so we don't talk about weight at all in this book because that's so secondary to the bigger question of like, how am I doing as a human in this world and taking care of myself? And we've had a lot of parents read this and a lot of friends of ours who we forced to read and give us feedback in the early stages. But what's interesting is that these lessons apply to everyone. And so parents, you might read it to try to better support your student as they go into college. But I think that there's some universal truths in here and some enduring ideas about how we speak to ourselves and how we give ourselves grace and kindness when we've been deviating from a plan. And like Erica said that she figured out what worked for her, but I won't speak for her, but I'll assume because of my own experience, even once you figure out what works for you, you're going to fall off of it because every day we have to make choices about how we're going to, use our time and negotiate our life. And sometimes you don't make the best ones. And so a lot of what we talk about in the book is not just how to get set up and be proactive, but how to restart when you fall off track, how you get yourself back on, and recognizing that that's just a normal part of the health equation. We've talked in some podcasts about how health isn't some video game that you just reach the level of health and you're like, sweet, I'm here, I'm done.
I've achieved it. Level healthy.
Right. It's more like that video game where you get, shot and you have to return, you keep dying and you return to the beginning.
Over and over again.
And bashing your head against the ground because you're like, why do I keep falling off? But it's so human because it's all based on choices. And so that's really what we talk about in the book is just all the choices that exist to you. And here's some research to support which ones might make you feel the best. But then here's some suggestions, both from research and from students, about how you just get yourself back on track. And it doesn't take more than the willingness to restart to get you there. But we wanted to really provide students with an understanding that it's going to be hard. It's going to be awesome, hopefully. But there's also going to be parts that are hard. And that might just be you have to change your habits. That might be you have to change your environment or your school. Everybody's going to have a different solution and everyone's going to have different struggles. But what we really wanted to give some airtime to with the book was just to set the foundation of it's going to be hard. That's okay. You haven't done anything wrong here. And there's a way to get back on track. And if you learn these lessons now in your 20s, you'll be more set up in your 30s and 40s and 50s. And there's still things to learn even when you have it seemingly figured out.
Yeah. And in a conversation about habits, I think Erica gives a great example of what she realized started to work for her and then how she was going to incorporate that into her life. We all have habits, right? I know it seems like it's this like magical thing that successful people know all the good habits. It's like we all have habits. It's just whether or not they're helping us. And learning how to incorporate something that makes you feel good into your day is such a worthy endeavor to go down, right? And she also did a really interesting example of stacking a habit, which is I'm going to work out before I go, or I'm going to do my homework and then I'm going to work out and then I'm going to go to class. And so by doing that, she's putting this structure in place that used to be there when I'm a junior in high school. I wake up, my parents give me breakfast, I rush out the door, and then from 7 until 3:30 or 5:30, if you play sports, your whole life is dictated for you. Right. So when that disappears, figuring out what are the things that make me feel good? And it's going to be different for everybody, right? But what are the things that make me feel good? And then how do I incorporate that into our lives? Really fast, you want to talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards?
Yeah, one of the interesting studies that I saw recently, and Crystal, I'd be curious if you want to weigh in on this, but is that so intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. Extrinsic is what, like, if I work out today, I'm going to eat ice cream tonight because I earned it. And I operate under those rewards, and I think a lot of people do. But the idea is that learning to celebrate intrinsic rewards, like I'm doing something for myself that is healthy because it makes me feel really good about myself, and I'm proud of that good decision. And so that there's not a lot of practice for high school kids going into college to really look inward and figure out what even makes me happy and what are some things I can do to feel good about myself. Do you want to weigh in on that? Have you seen much in your experience with students or research that talks about that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. We used to talk about this all the time when I taught first year experience classes, working with incoming students of all ages. I taught these at community colleges and four-year colleges. And I'm doing my homework to get a grade. I am doing this test. I'm taking this class. I'm going to college to get a degree, to get a job. That doesn't help us get through the hard times. When we do hit those struggles, it's that intrinsic reward, that intrinsic, I don't like calling it motivation because we need to have the habits just in spite of motivation. We can't rely on motivation because it's fleeting. It's going to come and it's going to go. It's the discipline that's really going to help us to stay true to those habits. But those intrinsic rewards of I am investing into my brain, I'm investing into my mind, I'm investing into my knowledge, I'm investing into my ability to be a contributing citizen to society, I am investing into my future, whatever it is. But looking at what is that internal reward that somebody is not going to see, and I might not get a payout for it, but it's something that's going to make me happy. And like, sometimes that might mean like, I'm going to eat a donut at the end of the day. Like, I'm going to eat some ice cream because you know what? It's been a day and ice cream would make me really happy in this moment.
Yeah.
And then paying attention to how you feel after you eat the ice cream. Right. And did that really make you happy? So being really in tune to that and taking the time to like really look inward. And I love that. Like what's going to make me happy, and why do I actually, why am I trying to do this? Like there's something more than just I'm going to college to get a degree, to get a job. Okay, why do you want a job? To pay bills. Why do you need to pay your bills? What are the bills that you need to pay? And kind of unraveling all those layers. And that's what's really going to help you get to that intrinsic piece that's going to keep driving you through. The intrinsic is so important to the discipline.
And a really important component of that is that it's within your control. There's so much in this world that if we allow it can make us feel bad about ourselves, right? I mean, you could pull up your phone and scroll twice and be like, well, I'm not amazing and everybody else is. You know, or whether or not you didn't get something that was out of your control, or whether or not you really wanted to be picked for this and it was out of your control. But whether or not you got up and you worked out, that was within your control. And if you do that and you're at the end of the day and you're like, you know what, I didn't have to do that, but I did that. Those are the kind of things that are going to keep you grounded. And those are the kind of things that are going to add up. And all of a sudden now you've got momentum moving in the right direction. And rather than spiraling and I don't know what to do, you're taking just that one step that's moving in a positive direction. And as a kind of a summer to-do list, one of the things that we talk about with parents is what can you talk about with your kids? What can your kids do before they try and get ready to go off to college? And that's one of the things that we suggest is you add one new habit, right? You just had this loss of structure in your life because you graduated and maybe you have a summer job or maybe you don't, but all of a sudden there is more time that you have control over than you did before. So start with one. And it could be exercise. It could be eating healthy for one meal a day. It doesn't matter what it is. You get to pick it, right? But add one of those things and practice listening to yourself.
Well, and what's important to recognize is that that habit may not be able to continue in college. It likely will get obliterated. But what you're doing is you're practicing that. You're practicing checking in with yourself, figuring out what it is that's going to make you feel good, implementing it, sticking to it, so that all that practice will make it easier for you to get back on track when you inevitably fall off. And you know, one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten in terms of taking care of myself mentally, physically, came from one of my best girlfriends right before I was about to give birth to our son. And she was like, I want you to write a list of 5 to 10 things that just make you happy. And they can't take long and they can't cost any money. And it should theoretically be something you can do in your own home because you're now a prisoner to your child. But she was like, I want you to write these down and I want you to put it on your fridge. And I was like, that's so dumb. Like, I know those things inherently, I guess. And even when I said that, I was like, do I really? Like, can I really rattle off 10 things that instantly make me happy? And her thing was like, you won't remember in the moment. When you're not feeling well, you're not going to remember what your instant happy triggers are. And so one of the pieces of advice that I would love to give to any of the students in here is spend some time this summer thinking about that, because you might be surprised that, you know, you may have more answers than you think, or you might not even really have ever taken the time to reflect on that. And put the list in your phone and share it with your parents so that when you need a reset, you just have it there and you can be like, oh, drinking an iced coffee makes me happy, or listening to some music and going on a walk. Erica, is there anything that, like, looking back at your freshman self, or if you were to be talking to somebody coming in now, advice that you would give them, things you wish you had thought about before you went in that might have helped to, you know, get you oriented when you got to college?
I think that there's something, I mean, when you go to college, everyone tells you embrace everything, be open-minded. And I think that is something to do when you go, because you're like, I need to figure out what things make me happy. But I would almost push that embrace the failure that will come with so many of those things, because you actually physically cannot like them all. Like you won't. So you can't expect that. And so you should be okay with saying no to the things that you realize don't make you happy.
Right.
But be so open-minded to try new things, because there's going to be random stuff that you realize that you love.
Right. That's one of the pieces of advice that came through in our book, was say no. Just be okay with the idea of saying no, because you have so much free time. Your instinct is you got to fill it. You got to fill it. And like you said, you might end up filling it with things that aren't actually serving you, because they're taking away time you need for other things, or, they're advancing you in some direction where you're like, I don't like fencing. Why am I fencing? Because it's here. And so just the idea of like you said, try things, but also don't be afraid if they're not working out. That was a lot of students said the exact same thing in the book. So
there was another piece I wanted to include, but before we run out of time, and that's before you head off to school, parents talking to your students for yourselves, make a call list. 5 people, friends, family, mentors, coaches, people who who would want to hear from you, who care about you. That's on the Notes app in your phone. Just make a list of those people. Because when you're in a bad spot, when you just had an argument with your new best friend, who maybe no longer is your new best friend, or you had a bad night drinking, or you didn't do well on a test, when that new world that you've created for yourself is turning dark and you're not liking it, you want to have a break from that. And these are the people you're going to call and you're going to reach out to, that remind you that there's more to life than just where you are right now, and that you have these people that you can rely on. But just like your story about when you're pregnant, you don't know what to do that's going to make you happy when you have a new baby. When you're in that spot, and I can speak to this from firsthand experience, when I had a panic attack my freshman year and I didn't know what to do, and I called somebody who picked up, and it made such an enormous difference to me. And I think that can have such value, and it's the kind of thing that you won't think of in that moment unless you look down, you're like, oh, okay, call so-and-so. That's what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
I think that's a really important thing. And coming out of this last year, which has been the way it's been for all of us, challenging in different ways, Crystal, what do you foresee for this fall in our kind of post-pandemic, hopefully, world as people are coming back to campus?
Such a great question. It's like the $1 million question. I feel like if I could answer this completely 100% accurately, I could retire now. I think there's a lot of excitement, and there's still a lot of fear around this upcoming year. Every college campus is handling post-pandemic, I'm using quotations because I don't want to jinx it, post-pandemic life a little bit differently. But it's a really exciting time for higher ed, because this last year of like immediate disruption, working in higher ed for a decade, like I can tell you, it's slower than a snail's pace to have any type of like systematic change in higher ed. But the fact that we had to drop everything and change completely from what we knew to work in the past and have to be really innovative, we're looking at the successes of really innovative programs on our campus right now. And it's a really exciting time to move into higher ed, because there's so much innovation that's taking place with student health and wellness at the forefront. At the forefront. We are paying so much attention to the incoming student class, as well as there's a really high emphasis on students who are returning for their second year because they didn't get that traditional first year experience.
Sure.
And they have their own set of new transition that they're going through as well now too. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's been a massive emphasis on student health and wellness during this transition, even more so than in the past, which is a lot. But that also means that higher ed is changing, and just like students embracing like the failure and the mistakes and the troubleshooting that's going to happen. It's happening on college campuses too. So there's kind of having that grace and that compassion for each other, for yourself, is really important coming into this new year. But know that student health and wellness has never been as high of a priority as it has been these last 2 years and coming up in the future. So where there's tons of support there, tons of support for students, but they have to ask, they have to advocate. So all the students listening, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because there's a reason why these offices exist, because enough students have the questions and the concerns that they need them. So definitely speak up.
Yeah, I just got done writing an article with another author of a college health book who is a frighteningly similar title.
And her name is Jill.
She's also a Jill. She's a doctor, so she's inherently cooler than I am. But hers is called The Ultimate College Student Health Handbook. And we just got done collaborating on an article about how this year's seniors headed to college might actually, hopefully, be better prepared for that transition. And I'd be curious to have you weigh in on this, Crystal. But one of the things that we found in talking to students was that they really had to embrace more academic autonomy this year because they were in a virtual space. A lot of their interaction with teachers was off the screen through email, which is really similar to what they'll experience in college. And another thing that they said was, and I found this particularly profound, was that the conversations about mental health have become more raw and honest. One of the students I talked to said, there's no point in joking about being stressed or anxious or depressed, which we used to between her friends, joke, oh, I'm so depressed right now, like, ha. And so she was like, we don't do that anymore because everybody's struggling. And so we're being really honest about where we're at. And so our hope is that that continues into the college space and what you're talking about of being aware of how you're feeling, maybe more so than ever before, and being willing to take the steps to get yourself back on track, because you've realized from this past year just how quickly things can take a turn when you're not asking for help when you need it. And so I'll be curious to see, and I'm really hopeful that this pandemic has had some silver linings for these seniors, and that was the argument that we both had. And so, let's hope that the support is there on campus, but that the students have learned some things from this past year that will make them point them in the direction of the help that they need.
Yeah, the numbers that we saw from 2010 to 2015 is that students reaching out for help with counselors on campus have increased by 34%. Now, you remember that's 2010 to 2015. That's not including this last year and what that's done to all of us, right? And so the pressures of being a young person going to college right now have never been higher, but the numbers also show that more people are reaching out. More people understand that this is a service for me to use, and maybe just checking in and being like, okay, yeah, that was a big deal, but now I feel better about it. That is a worthy question to ask, and not anything that you need to feel ashamed about. And so not just for students to understand that that's there for you and use it, but for parents to encourage their children to say, if you're not feeling great and you don't want to talk to me about it, there are places you can go to talk about these things.
Yeah, we're getting close to running out of time, but what I will say on the parent note, we had a lot of parents read this, and aside from learning things for themselves where they were like, I'm 50 and I'm putting this habit into place, was that this gave them something to respond to with their kid. So if you're a parent watching this and you think that this book is just for your student, I think it can be for both, and not just that you could individually learn things, but it's a great conversation starter, as one of the parents said, for your summer dinners. And I had a lot of parents coming back and saying that when they were talking about it with their kid, they were like, well, Jill says that you should do this, or Dave says, which I'm sure was very annoying for the kids, particularly those of them who know us. But I think that there is some real truth in that. This book can help you get into those difficult conversations, whether it's about mental health or drinking, regardless of what the feeling is about the legality of it within your family and what your own rules are. We go at it with a very scientific approach and just try to give an education about staying safe if you choose to do it. And even if you don't, you'll be surrounded by people who are making those choices. And the lack of education is typically what puts people in unsafe situations. And so I think we talk about a lot of heavy things in this book. And so even though the header chapters are food and exercise, and we share these foibles that are pretty ridiculous in the beginning of chapters, we go into some really heavy things that can be hard to just broach out of nowhere. And so our hope is that this can really start a dialogue in the summer before college. We even had, one person tell us the other day, this is a book I'd have parents buy at the beginning of high school so they could just be dropping the little trail of wisdom throughout the whole 4 years.
And then you gift it to your student when they graduate.
Your tattered copy with notes in it.
I'm not
don't do this. Don't be Dave.
I'm not sure if we're going to get cut off here or not, but if you go to our website, greatestcollegehealth.com, you can read sample chapters for free. You can read testimonials from students, parents, professionals. This is something that we put so much time and energy into because we believe this is needed. And we believe that putting it in a way that can engage first and foremost so that it's actually connecting and empower students to make choices that will benefit them is such a worthy endeavor. And I don't know if we have it up yet. Okay, sorry, I just saw it. We've got a BAC app that's going to be coming out very soon. That's going to be completely free. That's a resource that any of your students can use. So if they're trying to understand, well, how many drinks could I have in a night before I reach a point that is dangerous? All of the information in the book walks you through how to make those decisions so you understand for you, for your body, how do I stay safe? And that's one of the things that we have in the works that should be available, I believe, next week.
Yeah. So that's a great tool. But again, follow us for more updates through our website or our very pitiful social media. That's just not our strong suit. But I think that's it. So if there's questions, I've been kind of checking it as we go. But Erica or Crystal, any closing thoughts as people get ready to log off, given that we're at the hour? Oh, I put you both on the spot at the same time. Erica, you go. I pick you.
It's a crazy, wild ride. It's so much fun. And I don't want to sound like, no, it was not as fun as everyone said it was, because there were moments insane, so much fun. But just knowing that there are resources and that there are other people that are feeling the same way, and that there are a lot of people who act like they don't. And just listening to yourself and knowing what you need to do for yourself to make yourself happy and to feel supported. So to use those outlets and to find them.
Yeah. Crystal, anything else?
I echo everything Erica has said, and I'll add to go back to the conversation around choices. Improving and addressing any health and wellness concern or any failure or any mistake or stumbling block, it's literally a choice away. The next choice, just the next right choice is going to help get you back on track. So don't be afraid if that next right choice happens like the last day of your senior year. That's okay too.
And one thing I'll say is college is just the beginning of it, right? We have to put work into taking care of ourselves for the rest of our life. So you're not expected to get it right all the time right away. This is sort of just an introduction to how to do it. But a big onus is really on the students to learn what works for them. And we've really tried to hopefully provide a resource that is certainly not a recipe or a quick fix by any means. It's just a bunch of suggestions that students should be able to piece together and figure out. And we're still figuring it out. Our baby was in her pajamas until 6 p.m. today because we were just busy with other things. Life gets in the way, and taking care of yourself and taking care of business sometimes takes a back seat. And that's a constant, that just means we're all a constant work in progress. And our hope is that this lays the foundation in a way that is useful to keep building on for the rest of your time.
Yeah. And again, our website is greatestcollegehealth.com. My mother very graciously put it in the comments as such a wonderful mother would do. And so you can just copy and paste that. You buy this book through Vroman's, please. They're such a wonderful bookstore, and any support you can throw their way would be much appreciated. But we want to thank everybody from the bottom of our hearts. We understand how busy people are. And the fact that you would take time to spend time with us to talk about this project means a lot. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And yeah, let's stay safe this summer.
Yeah. Max, are you there?
I am. Hello. So I am a current college student going into my senior year. Currently in my dorm right now. Yeah, I related to every single point you made, especially surrounding first year. It was a very stressful time. But every point you made, I've eventually come to that realization. I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been nice to know coming in it. So I highly recommend this book to everyone in the audience. Crystal, Erica, Jill, Dave, thank you all so much. That was an incredible talk. And I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you guys so much.